Hi everyone, I'm Matt Schnittker. I'm at Walt Disney Animation Studios. This is going to be a talk about Zero Trust on the desktop. I joined the Academy Software Foundation working group for Zero Trust, and so I'm going to share both some stuff we're doing at the studio and some stuff we've talked about in the group. I've been with Walt Disney Animation Studios for 27 years. My first film was Dinosaur. I was very fortunate to get to work on and of course, we recently released Moana 2. Some of the very early 2D animation pipelines back when we were using CAPS, all the way now to some of our modern pipelines. This is our studio in Burbank. We like to say we're under the hat there. We are a vertically integrated studio, everything from story to post-production happening in the building there. I got to throw this in here. I also perform 1800s Magic Lantern shows. If you don't know about the Magic Lantern, now you do. If we were doing what we do now 150 years ago, we'd be doing that. This is visual effects and animation in the 1850s, all on glass slides, lots of different kinds of animation. So if you want to talk the Magic Lantern, I'm happy to talk about Magic Lantern shows. Thank you. Little more animation history. So Disney Studios, you know, we developed the multiplane camera, sort of changed the animation industry. That multiplane camera was digitized and turned into a software system in the 1980s. When I joined the studio, that was actually the first system I worked on, which was pretty cool to be part of that legacy, you know, maintaining a system that goes way back in animation history. And of course, we have the fully digital pipelines now. One thing that stayed consistent, and I think it stayed consistent back to the Magic Lantern, is animation is a very collaborative art form. What we do takes a lot of people collaborating together. You know, even if you go back to visual effects in the 1850s, someone would drop color in a water tank and someone else would enhance that by putting little creatures in there swimming around, and all kinds of visual effects were created, and we're still doing that. We're still building on each other's ideas. The art inspires the technology inspires the art. And what we do from a security perspective should help enhance the storytelling, not hinder it. You could say that if you blindly accept security standards, you might find yourself making lackluster films. You might have a very secure studio, but you need to be facilitating creativity as well. We are Linux on the desktop as our primary desktop OS. We use, we have a large compute farm that's used to render the movie. I like to call this the latency triangle because you have the desktops working on the shot. You have the render farm rendering out images, and then of course you have storage. And all these things need to be close together. And yes, we do render in the cloud, but as soon as you pull something apart, you're introducing latency to that triangle. We use an in-house piece of software called Coda. I manage the team that develops that, which is our in-house scheduler. It also can render on the desktop. So our desktops act as part of that render farm. This model traditionally has lent itself very well to traditional perimeter security, right? You're relying on your perimeter for your security, and inside the studio you have your Linux machines, you have NFS, you're controlling your endpoints, you're controlling your firewalls, you're very much limiting activity outside, and of course that's had to change over the years, right? It used to be able to say, well, everything runs in the building, and then SaaS became a thing, and we're running services outside the building. Cloud rendering became a thing. How do we securely work on the movie outside the building? New approaches started to exist as well, and especially Zero Trust. Someone was asking me earlier, well, what is Zero Trust? Zero Trust is not relying on the perimeter for your security. And nothing is accessed without first being authenticated. So instead of relying like I'm inside this box and everything's secure inside the box, I'm now allowing compute and things to happen outside the box, but I'm doing secure transport to that. So essentially, I'm now not reliant on trusting the endpoint in order to use it as part of my environment. This was a big change. It was a big change for us when we started moving this direction, because now you have to start thinking about HTTPS. You have to start thinking about single sign-on. You now have certificates for all your services, and certificates expire, usually at really inconvenient times if you're not paying attention. So now we got to keep track of all those certificates, and when do they expire? So you're changing what you're doing operationally, you're changing how you're prioritizing work, you're changing perhaps even your team structure to move in this direction. Usually when you start down this path, you're going to start with identity. Certainly I felt that was a good place to start. There's a reason that 80% of attacks or 70-something% of attacks now are identity, because identity in a zero trust world becomes your perimeter. I authenticate into your service from any endpoint. I can be in a coffee shop. I don't have to be on your network. And my identity and the service knowing that I'm me is now the way into that service. And then, there's a bunch of things that come out of that. Now you have to pay attention to the version of TLS, you have to pay attention to the version of SSO, there have been all these things. And of course, we've all probably experienced this a little bit, login fatigue. Now that your identity is your perimeter, I log into this service, okay, I'm in this service, that's great. Oh wait, now I gotta go use this other service, and maybe things are configured really good with my single sign-on and it just lets me in, or maybe it doesn't, and maybe I need to log in again, and that's a little frustrating. And then I go to use another service, and now I need to log in again. And it is this whole area now you need to pay attention to when you're in a zero trust world. Anyone could relate to that? Yeah, okay. So now we start looking at services, and I am talking specifically here about the desktop world. So, if you're in the zero trust world, we all use zero trust services, right? Like if you're bored with the talk right now, you're probably checking social media, and the social media account doesn't care what device you're on. It's a zero trust application. But when you're in the desktop, you're running in your desktop environment, probably with a locally installed program, against storage you're accessing somewhere. You need to have trust in that device, and this becomes more complicated. For those of us using Linux, for those of us using NFS storage, this is pretty challenging. How do I address this? How can I move those workloads into a zero trust world? And there's all kinds of different approaches to this. Some folks like, well, build a shim around your application and have it talk TLS and SSL and use OAuth tokens to talk to some storage thing out there. So drop out NFS, and okay, you did it for one app, now you got 27 more apps to do, right? And this quickly becomes a lot of work. So is this the right approach? Is it zero trust or nothing? Or should we think about this slightly differently? Some security trends I've picked up from talking to other people. In the zero trust world, you think, well, the perimeter's dead, identity is the new perimeter, but you kind of need to think about both, because not everything's going to move into that zero trust model. You kind of need to think about breadth versus depth. If you spend all your time focusing on one part of your environment, there may be something else you're totally missing. Like maybe you're really good at securing your content systems, but someone on production built this really cool website that shows a commissary menu and everybody loves it, and they're going there checking the commissary menu, and it just happens to have a bunch of vulnerabilities, and maybe someone can exploit that. So thinking the breadth of everything you're doing. We're in exciting times now where passwords are starting to become less important. We've implemented some passwordless workflows that are super cool. They help with the login fatigue for sure. You kind of need to think in layers of trust and layers of security. We've done quite a bit with looking at how we implement our single sign-on, how we do all the vulnerability management, and how we're doing antivirus. I like to say security is like an onion. It's layers. You're going to have services. Think about your services both in terms of the security of the service as well as the security of the content. So I may have a service that's really important because it has my really important content in it. Then I've got this other service over here that, again, is just the commissary menu. So the data there is less important. But then is that service secure as well? So I'll explain a little more what I mean there. A zero trust service is something I know can run anywhere, right? Like I say, we're all doing that with social media or some other application you're using, Gmail or something. Those are zero trust services. They can run anywhere. We know they're secure. Sometimes there's services you're going to kind of trust. Or maybe it's a zero trust service, but it has access to really sensitive data. So we don't want someone accessing that from a coffee shop. Or we don't want someone accessing that from a personal device. And then there's sort of your legacy services, your full trust world. And that's a world where you do have to really build up that perimeter and then think about next steps to how you secure it. So you're protecting on the hardness, the importance of the data as well as the hardness of the service. I mentioned trusted hosts. And there's a lot you can do now with how much you trust a host. We're not as mature here in Linux as we are on the Mac. We deploy a lot of Macs at the studio, and for us, a trusted host is something we know we can manage and control. So when you deploy a device, you add it to your MDM. There's two levels in that. There's a device that can be added into your MDM versus something that's fully supervised, which means I bought it from Apple. I bought it through the device enrollment program. It was added to my MDM when I bought it. Apple knows I own it, and I have full control over that device, right? That's a supervised device in MDM. There's a lot you can do now with SSO control. So if you're using, for example, Okta single sign-on, if you're doing passwordless, you're using the Okta Verify app, you can have your app enrolled, which means the user logged into that, or you can have an app that's fully managed, which means I know this is a device we own, I know this is a device that's in my MDM, and I have control of this device. Most of these tools now will talk to EDR tools, so they'll talk to like CrowdStrike, where they know how secure this device is. So you can actually look at things like device posture, you can look at things like device OS level, patch level, and allow or disallow access to services based on how much you trust that device. So again, we're having flavors of access based on the device posture. And of course, device trust is a feature I really like. It's a feature where you can actually deny login to a device based on the security posture of the device. So I can say, for example, this device is not owned by us, it's not allowed to log into the service. I'm only going to allow devices that we own to access this service. Or depending on where you decide your level of trust is. So I like to think of this in sort of layers. There's stuff I can access over the internet, fully zero trust. I don't need to trust a device at all. Maybe things that are, I want people to have to VPN in to get to them. So maybe I want to make sure it's a trusted device. And then, we're talking about also, a lot of studios, we have a red zone. We have an area where there's no internet access, or it's broken up by show or broken up by, departments. And there's lots of ways you can approach that. All right, so there is an Academy Software working group to talk about this. We have a Zero Trust working group. It's a great group to join if any of this is interesting to you. Sort of two areas that we've been talking about. Right now the focus is on the desktop. So we're talking mostly about how can we make the desktop environment more secure? How can we pull the desktop more into a Zero Trust world? Sort of two areas we're talking about right now. One is identity services. You're logging into when you're logging into a web service, it's pretty straightforward. I've logged in and I have access. But what about a desktop app? How do we handle multiple logins there? and also more about network overlays. So, network overlays is another approach that, to handling interconnection. So I get on the network, I have access to all these things. What if we could put access controls on endpoints and have them have per service control within the network on top of what we're already doing? Daryl did a great lab with OpenZiti there on a great demo. I think that's probably that technology has a way to go till, so you could do something like putting it in front of your NFS servers, but it is something we've been chatting about. We've also been chatting about different ways to solve the desktop identity problems. So, and this is really applications that may not use SSO. So for example, I'm launching an application and it has a plugin and it has OAuth tokens and it's using those tokens to access secure resources. Is there a way that we could have the user log into those and then share that amongst plugins? Because API keys are okay, but we do feel like it's a place where more could be done. And then we've been talking about maybe there's a project there in like a proxy identity service where you could authenticate and then that identity could be shared across applications at the desktop level. Kind of like SSO, but for the desktop environment. Again, it's still early days. Right now we're throwing ideas and designs about, but if this is interesting to you, there is a Zero Trust Working Group. Our documentation is there. You can go to this URL and collaborate. So hopefully that is something that interests some of you and you'll join. You know what they called Mr. Cumference when he became a knight? Circumference. Yeah. You know what the pirate said when his parrot disappeared? Polygon. Yeah. You know why your neighbor doesn't get these jokes? 'Cause he can't. All right. I hope you all enjoyed that. Reach out with questions and have a great event.